My name's Sarah, and I've got a story to tell you. I grew up in a military family, just me and my dad. Mom couldn't handle the stress of constant moves and took off after I was born. Dad, bless him, did his best, but he was always away on duty. So, I ended up living with my grandmother for most of my early years. When I was about 3, Dad remarried. A year later, my half-sister, Emily, came along. I didn't see much of them at first, still living with Grandma and all. But things changed when I turned 10. Dad retired from the military, got a fat pension, and bought a house. He came to get me, saying it was time for us to be a proper family. I was excited at first. A new house, a new family, it seemed like a dream come true. But reality hit hard and fast. My stepmom, Linda, was okay, I guess. She tried to make me feel welcome, but it was clear Emily was her priority. And Emily? Well, she was a nightmare from day one. "That's my room," she screamed when Dad showed me to my new bedroom. "I want it. Make her sleep in the attic." Dad tried to calm her down. "Emily, honey, there's plenty of space for both of you. Sarah needs a room too." But Emily wasn't having it. She threw herself on the floor, kicking and screaming. I stood there, suitcase in hand, feeling like an intruder in what was supposed to be my home. That was just the beginning. Emily made it her mission to make my life hell. She'd accidentally spilled juice on my homework, draw on my textbooks, and hide my things. I learned pretty quick that in this house, Emily could do no wrong. No matter what she did, it was always, "Sarah, be the bigger person," or "Sarah, you need to set a good example." So, I stopped complaining. I learned to hide my important stuff and ignore Emily's antics as best I could. But it wasn't just Emily making things tough. When I was 12, the doctor dropped a bombshell on us. I had problems with my thyroid, hyperfunction, he called it. He said I'd live a normal life, but having kids would probably be off the table. I remember sitting in that sterile office, the words washing over me like ice water. Dad squeezed my hand, trying to comfort me, but I felt numb. At 12, having kids wasn't exactly on my radar, but knowing it might never happen? That hit hard. Emily, being the brat she was, overheard and started calling me empty nut. It stung, but I tried not to let it show. I buried myself in my computer games, finding solace in virtual worlds where I could be anyone, do anything. Life trudged on, and before I knew it, I was 16. That's when everything changed again. Grandma passed away, leaving me her inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make Emily's eyes go wide with envy. "It's not fair," she whined at the dinner table. "Why does Sarah get all the money? We should use it for a family vacation." Dad backed me up, surprisingly. "Emily, that's Sarah's inheritance. She can decide what to do with it." I had plans for that money. All those hours spent gaming hadn't just been an escape, they'd given me an idea. I wanted to open a network of computer clubs for teenagers, maybe even a camp for training esports athletes. A place where kids like me could feel at home, surrounded by people who got it. When I shared my idea, Emily laughed so hard she nearly choked on her peas. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Who'd want to go to a nerd camp?" "It's not dumb," I shot back. "Esports is growing. It could be big. High school graduation couldn't come fast enough. College was a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I could just be Sarah, not the girl with the annoying sister, or the one who couldn't have kids." I threw myself into my studies, focusing on business management. All the while, my dream of the esports camp simmered in the back of my mind. After graduation, I took a leap of faith. I packed my bags and headed to South Korea for an internship. If I was going to learn about esports, why not go to the Mecca? Those 3 years in Korea were intense. I worked my ass off, learning everything I could about running gaming centers and managing teams. I saw firsthand how esports could change lives, giving kids a sense of purpose and belonging. When I finally came back home, I was ready. I used Grandma's money to rent a small space and turned it into my first computer club. It wasn't much, just a dozen computers and some second-hand furniture, but it was mine. The first few months were tough. Some days, I'd sit there alone, wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. But slowly, word spread. Kids started trickling in after school, then flooding in on weekends. 5 years flew by in a blur of expansion, tournaments, and sleepless nights. Before I knew it, I had 5 thriving clubs and a full-fledged training camp for aspiring esports athletes. My team was racking up wins left and right. I was so focused on work that dating wasn't even on my radar. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. It was at a gaming convention. I was there scouting new talent when I quite literally ran into him. Coffee went flying, splattering both our shirts. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I stammered, frantically grabbing napkins. He just laughed, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. "No worries. I needed a wake-up call anyway. I'm Jake." "Sarah," I replied, feeling my cheeks heat up. We ended up talking for hours, long after our shirts had dried. Jake was a game developer, passionate about creating educational games for kids. He got my vision for the clubs in a way few others had. As we said goodbye, he hesitated. "Listen, Sarah, would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? Preferably without wearing it?" Our coffee date turned into dinner, then weekend trips, and before I knew it, a year had flown by. He was different from anyone I'd ever met, supportive, kind, and he actually listened when I talked about my work. One night, over a homemade dinner, Jake got down on one knee. I was overjoyed, but a nagging voice in the back of my head wouldn't let me fully embrace the moment. "Jake, wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you need to know." I told him about my thyroid condition, about the likelihood that we'd never have children. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. Jake just smiled and took my hands in his. "Sarah, I love you. Kids or no kids, I want to spend my life with you. We'll face whatever comes together." Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, too choked up to speak. He slipped the ring on my finger, and just like that, we were engaged. When we went to tell my family, I was a bundle of nerves. Dad was thrilled, of course. He clapped Jake on the back so hard I thought he might knock him over. "Welcome to the family, son," he boomed. Linda offered a tight smile and a quick hug. "And Emily?" She didn't even bother to come downstairs to meet Jake. I could hear her music blasting from her room, a clear message that she couldn't care less about my engagement. The wedding ceremony was perfect, simple, heartfelt, surrounded by our closest friends and colleagues. As we exchanged vows, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. At the reception, I scanned the room, a small part of me still hoping to see Emily. Instead, a waiter approached with a large, beautifully wrapped box. "A delivery for the bride," he announced. The sender said to open it in front of everyone. My heart skipped a beat. Could this be Emily's way of making amends? Hopeful, I tore into the wrapping paper. But as I lifted the lid, my blood ran cold. Inside were baby clothes, tiny onesies, booties, and bibs. The room fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, could almost hear the whispers starting. Jake was at my side in an instant, his arm around my waist. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I couldn't speak. Tears stung my eyes as the realization hit me, this wasn't an olive branch. It was a deliberate, cruel reminder of what I couldn't have. Jake took one look in the box and understood. His jaw clenched, but his voice was gentle when he spoke to our guests. "Looks like someone jumped the gun on baby gifts," he said with a forced laugh. "How about we get back to the dancing?" As I danced with Jake, laughed with our friends, a small part of me couldn't help but wonder, would I ever truly be free of my sister's shadow? The years after the wedding flew by in a whirlwind of work and ambition. I threw myself into expanding my business, driven by a mix of passion and, if I'm honest, the need to prove myself. Those computer clubs I dreamed of? they were thriving. But the real jewel in my crown was the esports training camp. I spent more and more time at the camp, coaching and mentoring. It was incredible to watch these kids grow, not just in their gaming skills, but in confidence and teamwork too. But while my professional life was soaring, my personal life was complicated. Every visit to my parents' house felt like walking into a minefield. Emily's hostility hadn't lessened over the years, if anything, it had intensified. She'd make snide comments about how I'd stolen Grandma's money, how I was getting rich off her inheritance. Must be nice, she'd sneer, living it up while the rest of us struggle. I tried to brush it off, but her words stung. Emily, I worked hard for everything I have, I'd say, trying to keep my voice level. Grandma's money just gave me a start. But she'd just roll her eyes and mutter something about how I always got everything handed to me. Dad and Linda would try to intervene, to smooth things over, but it was useless. The rift between us just kept growing. I started avoiding family gatherings when I could. It was easier to make excuses about work than to deal with Emily's constant jabs. Jake was my rock through it all, always ready with a hug and a reminder that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "You're amazing," he'd tell me, his eyes full of love. "Don't let anyone make you doubt that." But there was one doubt that kept creeping in, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. Kids. We'd been trying for a while now, hoping against hope that the doctors had been wrong. Each month brought a new wave of disappointment. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor one night, staring at yet another negative pregnancy test. Jake found me there, silent tears streaming down my face. "Hey," he said softly, sliding down to sit beside me. "It's okay. We knew this might happen, remember?" I nodded, unable to speak. He pulled me into his arms, and I let myself break down. "I just wanted to prove them wrong," I sobbed. "To show that I could have it all, the career, the family." Jake stroked my hair gently. "Sarah, listen to me. You are not defined by whether or not you can have kids. You're changing lives every day with your work. You're building a legacy that goes beyond biology." His words helped, but the ache remained. We talked about other options, adoption, surrogacy, but for now, we decided to focus on our life together and my growing business. 10 years. It hardly seemed possible that a decade had passed since I opened my first computer club. As the anniversary approached, I decided it was time for a celebration, not just of my success, but of all the kids whose lives had been touched by our programs. I spared no expense for the party. The main hall of our flagship camp was transformed into a glittering wonderland of tech-themed decorations. Gaming stations were set up alongside a lavish buffet, blending the world of esports with classic party elements. The guests started arriving, current and former students, parents, industry colleagues, even a few local celebrities who'd taken an interest in our work. I plastered on my best hostess smile, greeting everyone warmly. Then I saw Emily. My heart dropped to my stomach. What was she doing here? I certainly hadn't invited her. She was arm in arm with a guy I didn't recognize, probably her latest boyfriend. To my surprise, she seemed subdued. No snide remarks, no eye rolling. Just a quiet congratulations as she passed by. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this evening without incident. The party was in full swing. Kids were showing their parents their favorite games, business contacts were being made over hors d'oeuvres, and the general buzz of excitement filled the air. I was just starting to relax when I saw Emily making her way to the stage. My blood ran cold. What was she doing? Before I could react, she had grabbed the microphone. "Excuse me, everyone. I have something to say." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Emily. "I know we're here to celebrate my sister's success," she began, her voice sickly sweet. "But I think it's important that you all know the truth." I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak. "Parents, do you really want your children spending time in a place run by someone who can't possibly understand their needs?" Emily's eyes found mine in the crowd, a cruel glint in them. My sister can't have children of her own. How can a childless woman truly know what's best for your kids? Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Emily wasn't done. I, on the other hand, am pregnant. She paused, letting that sink in. And I'm opening my own esports camp. One run by someone who actually understands children, who will experience the joys and challenges of parenthood firsthand. I stood there, shell-shocked, as Emily's words hung in the air. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Years of buried pain about my infertility came rushing back, threatening to overwhelm me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Thank God for Jake. He was at my side in an instant, his arm around my waist, steadying me. "Let's get some air," he murmured, but I shook my head. I couldn't let them see me run away. Jake squeezed my hand and turned to address the crowd. "Well, folks, how about we lighten the mood? I hear the chefs have outdone themselves with the dessert spread. Why don't we all head over for a tasting?" As the murmuring crowd moved towards the buffet, I slipped away to a quiet corner. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone, seeing notification after notification popping up. Our live stream. I'd completely forgotten about it in the chaos. Comments were flooding in. Some were supportive. "What that woman did was disgusting. Sarah, you're an inspiration. Having kids doesn't make you a good mentor. Sarah's track record speaks for itself." But others were brutal. "How can she run a camp for kids when she can't even have her own? I wouldn't want my child around someone so unnatural." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I pasted on a smile and made small talk when necessary, but inside, I was crumbling. Jake handled most of it, smoothly covering for me when I fell silent or lost track of conversations. Just when I thought the night couldn't get any worse, chaos erupted near the exit. There was a scream, then a thud. I rushed over to see what had happened. My heart stopped. Emily was sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, clutching her stomach, her face contorted in pain. Her boyfriend was kneeling beside her, panic written all over his face. "Someone call an ambulance," he shouted. As he helped Emily to her feet, her eyes locked onto mine. The hatred I saw there chilled me to the bone. "You," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did this. You pushed me." I recoiled, shocked. "What? No, I didn't, I wasn't even near." But Emily wasn't listening. As her boyfriend started to lead her out, she kept screaming. "You're jealous of my baby. You couldn't stand that I can have what you can't." Her words cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had long since healed. I stood there, frozen, as they disappeared through the doors. The remaining guests were staring, some with suspicion, others with pity. I felt exposed, raw, like my deepest insecurities had been laid bare for all to see. The morning after the party, I was nursing a cup of coffee, trying to make sense of the previous night's chaos, when there was a knock at the door. Jake answered it, and I heard low, serious voices. My stomach dropped. "Sarah?" Jake called, his voice tight. "There's a police officer here to see you." I walked to the door on shaky legs. The officer, a stern-faced woman, introduced herself as Detective Martinez. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm here about the incident involving your sister last night," she said. "She's filed a complaint against you. She's lost the baby, and is accusing you of pushing her down the stairs." Jake stepped in, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "We have a full recording of the event. It was being live-streamed." We spent the next few hours going over everything with Detective Martinez. I provided the live-stream footage, the guest list, statements from staff and guests. By the end, I was exhausted but hopeful. Surely, with all this evidence, they'd see I was innocent. A few days later, Detective Martinez called. "Mrs. Thompson, we've concluded our investigation," she said. "You've been cleared of all suspicion." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. "We've identified the actual perpetrator," she continued. "It was your sister's boyfriend, Mark Stevens. We have clear video evidence of him pushing her. I felt sick. But, why? He confessed during questioning, Detective Martinez explained. Apparently, he didn't want to marry your sister or have a child with her. He claimed she was forcing him into marriage by threatening to create a scandal. Your sister has been informed of the findings. I thanked her and hung up, feeling numb. It was over. I was cleared. But why didn't I feel relieved? The answer came in the form of a vitriolic voicemail from Emily later that day. This is all your fault, her voice screeched through the speaker. If you hadn't upset me so much at that stupid party, Mark wouldn't have felt pressured to do this. You're the reason I lost my baby. I listened, dumbfounded, as she ranted on, spinning increasingly illogical reasons why I was to blame. According to Emily, I had somehow manipulated Mark into pushing her. I had created such a stressful environment that it drove him to it. On and on she went, each accusation more outlandish than the last. The fallout from Emily's accusations didn't stop with her voicemail. A few days later, I got a call from Dad. His voice was heavy, tired. Sarah, honey, he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but Linda's taken Emily's side in all this. I closed my eyes, feeling a fresh wave of pain wash over me. What do you mean, Dad? He sighed deeply. She says you're not welcome in the house anymore. That you've caused enough trouble. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd never been close to Linda, but to be outright banned from my childhood home? It hurt more than I expected. I'm so sorry, sweet pea, Dad continued, his voice cracking. I want you to know, I don't agree with any of this. I know you're innocent. I've tried talking to them, but it's okay, Dad, I said, even though it wasn't. You don't have to choose sides. But apparently, he already had. Over the next few weeks, I heard from him regularly. He and Linda were fighting constantly. She couldn't understand why he wouldn't condemn me, why he insisted on maintaining a relationship with his troublemaker daughter. It all came to a head about a month after the party incident. Dad called, sounding more resolved than I'd heard him in years. I'm divorcing Linda, he said without preamble. I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I won't choose between my daughters, and I won't live with someone who asks me to. I felt a mix of guilt and relief. Dad, you don't have to do this. I don't want to break up your marriage. You're not, he assured me. This has been coming for a long time. Emily's accusations were just the last straw. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. The constant drama, the accusations, the family strife, it all seemed so pointless, so destructive. And for what? I made a decision then. I called Dad back. Dad, I said, my voice steady, I've been thinking. I don't want to have any contact with Emily anymore. Or Linda. I can't keep doing this. There was a long pause. Then, I understand, honey, I really do. You have to take care of yourself. His support gave me the courage to take the next step. The following day, I contacted a lawyer and filed for a restraining order against Emily. It felt extreme, but after everything that had happened, I knew it was necessary. To my relief, the judge granted the order. Emily couldn't come near me, my home, or my businesses. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Afterwards, as Jake and I sat on our porch watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. I should have done this years ago, I said softly. Set boundaries, I mean. Maybe things wouldn't have gotten so out of hand. Jake squeezed my hand. You can't change the past. But you're taking control of your future, that's what matters. I nodded, leaning into him. You know, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we revisited the idea of adoption. We have so much love to give, Jake. Why not share it with a child who needs it? As we sat there, planning our future, I felt truly hopeful for the first time in ages. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, dealing with my fractured family, starting the adoption process, but I knew with Jake by my side, I could handle anything. Life had thrown me plenty of curveballs, but I was still standing. My business was thriving, I had a loving husband, and now, the possibility of a child to call our own. Emily and her drama no longer had the power to overshadow all the good in my life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a silent promise to myself. No more letting others dictate my worth. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. From now on, I would stand tall, proud of who I am and what I've accomplished. After all, family isn't just about blood. It's about love, support, and understanding. And looking at Jake, thinking about our future child, I knew I had all the family I needed right here.
This story is titled, My Twin Sister and I Graduated from High School, but our parents gave her a trip to Hawaii, leaving me at home when they returned. They were shocked to see the expensive car that someone had given me for graduation. Hey everyone! So, I've been holding this in for a while and figured it's time to put it out there. My name's Natalie, 18 female, and I'm a twin. My sister Mia and I are only a few minutes apart, but honestly, it feels like we're living in different worlds. Everyone assumes twins are equals. Two halves of the same coin. Not in my case. With my family, Mia's the star, and I'm just the extra. Let me lay some background. Growing up in our house wasn't bad if you didn't mind playing second fiddle. Our parents, Linda and Robert Hayes, are classic suburban parents. Mom's a real estate agent, who looks like she lives for open houses and client lunches. Dad's an accountant, who runs his own little firm. Together, they're all about appearances. Nice house, perfect lawn, good schools. It's all about keeping up the image. But the image only really worked if Mia was front and center. I started noticing the difference in treatment when we were little. It wasn't obvious at first, more like a pattern that only became clear over time. Mia always got the shiny new things, while I got the leftovers. Like when we went shopping for school supplies, Mia would get the cool Lisa Frank folders and gel pens, and I'd end up with the generic stuff from the bargain bin. The holidays made it even clearer. Mia got the toys everyone wanted. I remember one Christmas when she got this huge Barbie dream house, and I got some off-brand doll that looked like it came from a garage sale. I didn't say anything, and my parents thought I'm okay with that. Even on our birthdays, Mia's gifts were flashier, and the decorations always felt like they were picked just for her. At first, I tried not to let it bother me. I thought, it's just stuff, right? But it wasn't just about the material things. It was how they treated her versus how they treated me. Mom would light up when Mia walked into a room, asking about her day, her friends, her school projects. When I tried to chime in, their attention would drift, like they couldn't wait for me to finish talking. It wasn't all bad, though. School was my escape. While Mia was busy being the center of attention at home, I buried myself in my studies. I was a good student. No, a great one. I aced my tests, finished assignments early, and always got glowing comments from my teachers. At first, I thought my parents might notice and maybe, just maybe, be proud of me, but they didn't. The only time they seemed to pay attention was when my success made Mia uncomfortable. She hated it when teachers called me the smart one, or when I got awards at school. I remember one time in middle school when I got a certificate for academic excellence. I was so excited, but Mia couldn't stand it. It's not that big a deal, she said. They give those to everyone. Her jealousy got worse in high school. I was taking honors classes and earning top grades. I'm kinda nerd, I won't lie. Meanwhile, Mia was more about popularity and sports. Not to say she wasn't smart, she could do well when she tried, but she didn't put in the effort. And yet, our parents still acted like she walked on water. One thing that really drove me crazy was how much money they spent on her. Mia got everything she wanted: designer clothes, extracurricular activities, and endless support. When she wanted to try ballet, they paid for lessons, costumes, and recitals. When I asked if I could take art classes, I got a flat, "We can't afford that." Somehow the budget always stretched for Mia's interests, but never for mine. Even when it came to chores, things were uneven. Mia hardly lifted a finger. If she did one small thing, Mom would shower her with praise. Meanwhile, I'd clean the entire kitchen and barely get a thanks. It wasn't just unfair. It was exhausting. I was feeling invisible. There were times I wondered if I could do something amazing, win a science fair, get a scholarship, solve world hunger, and they'd still only see Mia. That feeling of being unseen started to weigh on me, but I didn't know how to handle it. When I was 12, I overheard something that cemented it for me. I couldn't sleep and went downstairs for a drink of water. My parents were talking in the living room, their voices low but clear enough for me to catch. "Sometimes I think it would have been easier if we didn't have twins," Dad said. Mia would have been enough. My heart dropped. I stood there, my tears runned on my face. Mom didn't even argue. Instead, she sighed and said, "Mia's special. She's going to do great things. Natalie, Well, she's fine. I felt something inside me shifted. That's when I realized there was no point in trying to win their approval. I'd never be Mia. And to them, that meant I'd never be enough. From that day on, I decided to focus on myself. I stopped caring about their validation and poured all my energy into school. If they didn't want to see me, fine. I'd make sure the rest of the world did. High school was a game changer. I took every advanced class I could and joined academic clubs. My teachers noticed my dedication and encouraged me. I got awards, scholarships, and recognition that I knew my parents would never give me. Funny thing is, the more I succeeded, the more it bothered Mia. She couldn't stand it when teachers praised me or when I got asked to tutor other students. She'd roll her eyes and mutter, "teacher's pet," under her breath. Sometimes she'd even tell our parents I was showing off, but I didn't care. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was doing it for me. By the time college admissions rolled around, I knew I had a shot at getting into a top school. I worked hard on my applications, stayed up late writing essays, and made sure every detail was perfect. I wasn't just dreaming of leaving. I was preparing for it. Meanwhile, Mia barely tried. She applied to a state school that didn't require much effort and spent most of her time hanging out with friends. Our parents didn't seem to mind. "Mia's got other talents," Mom said once, as if that excused her laziness. As I waited for my acceptance letters, I couldn't help but feel a little hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, getting into a great college would finally make my parents see me. But deep down, I wasn't holding my breath. So, acceptance season finally rolled around, and I got the email I'd been waiting for. Columbia University. Full acceptance. My heart was racing when I saw the letter. After all the late nights, essays, and the ridiculous mountain of applications, it finally felt like my hard work had paid off. I printed the letter and brought it home thinking, maybe this will be it. Maybe this will be the thing that makes them see me. I know it's dumb, but a small part of me really thought my parents might finally look at me with some actual pride instead of the usual indifference. When I got home, though, I could already tell something was off. Mia was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Mom and Dad were at the dining table, their heads close together, surrounded by brochures. They didn't even look up when I came in. "Hey, I have some news," I said, holding up the acceptance letter. "Not now, Natalie," Mom said, waving me off without even glancing in my direction. "We're busy." That stung. "Busy with what?" I asked. "Hawaii," Mia said, smirking as she dragged the word out like it was some inside joke I wasn't in on. "Hawaii?" I repeated. My first thought was, wait, are we going on a family vacation? I started feeling a little excited. "What's going on?" Mom didn't even look up from the table. "Just something special," she said, sounding way too casual. I stood there, hoping for more. Like, hello? A little context, please? But nope, nothing. Finally, Mia rolled her eyes. "Mom and Dad are planning a trip. You don't need to worry about it." Okay, that threw me off. Why wouldn't I need to worry about it? It's a family trip, right? Of course I'm included, right? I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself, you're overthinking it. It's probably just a surprise for everyone. But later that night, as I was heading to bed, I heard them talking again in the kitchen. "It's going to be perfect," Mom was saying, her voice full of excitement. "Mia deserves something special before college. She's worked so hard." Worked hard? Mia barely did the bare minimum to get into state college. But okay, sure. Dad agreed. Just the three of us. It'll be a nice family getaway. Just the three of us. And there it was. They weren't planning a family trip. They were planning their trip, a celebration for Mia, and I wasn't even part of the equation. I looked at the acceptance letter sitting on my desk. The excitement I'd felt earlier was gone. Instead, I felt this dull, empty ache. I wanted to confront them. But what was the point? I already knew what they'd say. The next day, I tried to piece together more details. I overheard snippets of conversations, caught Mia talking to her friends about beaches and resorts, and saw a confirmation email on Mom's open laptop. A week in Hawaii at some 5-star hotel. Flights already booked. They didn't even bother hiding it from me. Not even giving any excuse, just business as usual. Like I wasn't even there. I kept my head down and went about my day. But inside, I was fuming. It wasn't just about the trip. It was about what it represented. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I'd always be second place. Mia, of course, couldn't resist rubbing it in. Every chance she got, she'd drop little hints. "Mom says I'm going to love snorkeling," she'd say, looking right at me. Or, "I can't wait to see the sunsets there. They're supposed to be incredible." I ignored her. If she wanted a reaction, she wasn't going to get it from me. A few days before the trip, I decided to see my school counselor for advice. I told her about my acceptance to Columbia and how my parents were ignoring it while celebrating Mia's Hawaii trip. She listened and told me I should be proud of my achievements. I thought that was the end of it. But you know that you cannot trust school counselors at all? I don't know why I even told her. I guess I was desperate. The next day, Mom came home furious. Natalie, what lies did you tell your counselor? She snapped. What are you talking about? I asked, confused. She called me. She said you're making it sound like we don't care about you or support you. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? I didn't lie, I said quietly. I told her the truth, that you're ignoring me and celebrating Mia. Her face turned red. Ungrateful. That's what you are. We've given you everything, and now you're trying to make us look bad? You've always been jealous of Mia. She stormed out, leaving me standing there. No matter what I did, I'd always be the problem. And this incident didn't even got my mom thinking maybe she's making a mistake, or maybe I am hurt. She didn't give a shit. The morning of their trip came faster than I expected. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard them loading their suitcases into the car. Mia walked in looking like she was already in vacation mode. Don't worry, sis, she said. I'll send you pictures. You know, so you can live vicariously through me. My mom told me to take care of the house before she got in the car. My dad gave me a quick goodbye wave. As the car pulled out of the driveway, I watched from the window. For a split second, I felt a pang of sadness. Not because I wanted to go to Hawaii, but because it was another reminder of where I stood in their eyes. And yeah, that's it. My family are off to Hawaii, celebrating a milestone of my twin, like she was the only one in the family with accomplishments. Meanwhile, I am here, left to take care of the house like some live-in maid. Part of me wants to be furious, to scream and yell and break something, but mostly I just feel stuck. I don't want to feel like this anymore. I don't want to keep swallowing their treatment like it's normal or something I just have to accept, but I don't know what to do. Right now, I'm stuck between wanting to prove my worth to them and realizing I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't need to beg for basic respect or acknowledgement. But how do you let go of something you've been chasing your whole life? I'm open to any advice or suggestions because, honestly, I feel lost. If you've got any ideas, I'm all ears. Update 1. Hey everyone, it's me again. After everything that's happened, I'm sitting here realizing I've spent way too much of my life waiting for things to change. Waiting for my parents to notice me. Waiting for Mia to stop being the center of their universe. Waiting for someone to say, hey Natalie, you matter too. But you know what? I'm done waiting. Once they were gone, the house was eerily quiet. I sat on the couch, trying to figure out what to do next. That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. I don't even know how it came into my mind. When I was younger, I overheard Mom having this heated argument on the phone. She was talking to her brother, Uncle Jack. She said he was a bad influence and an embarrassment, and she basically told him to stay out of her life. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I barely knew anything about him, except that he lived nearby and wasn't part of our family picture-perfect bubble. But sitting there in that empty house, it hit me. Maybe Jack was exactly the person I needed to talk to. Someone who'd been pushed out of their lives for not fitting into their mold. Someone who might actually understand what it feels like to be on the outside looking in. Grabbing my laptop, I did a quick search and found his address. It wasn't far, just a few miles away. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. I honestly needed to go somewhere anyway. I didn't know what I was expecting when I got there. His house was small and modest, with a front yard full of overgrown plants. I hesitated for a moment, then knocked on the door. When he answered, I froze. He looked older than I'd imagined, with gray streaks in his hair and a worn flannel shirt. For a second, I thought I'd made a mistake. Can I help you? He asked, his brow furrowing. Hi, I said awkwardly. I'm Natalie, Linda's daughter. His eyes widened. Linda's daughter? He stared at me for a moment, then smiled. Well, I'll be damned. Come on in. The inside of his house was cluttered but cozy. He led me to the kitchen, where he poured us both cups of coffee. So, he said, leaning back in his chair, what brings you here? I hesitated, unsure how much to say. It's complicated. Let's just say things aren't great at home. Linda always was a piece of work, Jack said with a dry laugh, shaking his head. I'm not surprised things turned out this way. She's been like that for as long as I can remember. I was confused and curious. What do you mean? His expression shifted slightly, something between frustration and sadness. Let's just say your mom's got her priorities, and they don't always include doing the right thing. He glanced at me, almost like he wanted to say more but stopped himself. Just keep in mind, Natalie, you're not the first person in this family to get pushed aside for speaking the truth. So there I was, sitting in Uncle Jack's kitchen, sipping coffee and spilling parts of my life story to someone I barely knew. I didn't mean to unload so much, but once I started talking, it all just came pouring out. I told him about Colombia, about how hard I'd worked to get in, and about how my parents barely seemed to notice. I wasn't planning on mentioning the Hawaii thing, but it slipped out. They're on a trip right now, I said. A family trip. Except, I wasn't invited. His eyebrows raised. Let me guess. Mia's there? Of course, I said, laughing bitterly. They're treating it like some big celebration for her. He shook his head, muttering something under his breath. Classic Linda. She's always had a way of picking favorites. After a while, Jack changed the subject, asking me about my plans for college. He seemed genuinely interested, which was kind of a shock. I wasn't used to people caring about what I had to say. We talked for hours, and by the time I left, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally let go of something I didn't even realize I was holding on to. A couple of days later, Jack called me. Hey, Natalie, you free this afternoon? Yeah, why? I've got something to show you. Come by the house when you can. I wasn't sure what he meant, but I didn't have much else going on, so I hopped in my car and drove over. When I got there, Jack was waiting outside, leaning against an old pickup truck. Come on, he said, motioning for me to follow him around the side of the house. We walked to the driveway and there it was, a brand new BMW 3 Series, shiny and sleek like it just rolled off the lot. I froze mid-step, my brain short-circuiting for a second. Wait, what? He smiled, holding up a set of keys. It's yours. I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. What? Number I can't? Sure you can, he said, cutting me off. You earned it. He handed me the keys and I took them reluctantly, still trying to process what was happening. Jack, I don't even know what to say. Say you'll drive it to Columbia and make me proud, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. I couldn't help but laugh. Seriously, though, why are you doing this? Jack's expression softened. Because you deserve it, and because someone needs to show you that you're worth celebrating. I tried to fight back tears. Nobody had ever done something like this for me. It wasn't just about the car. It was about what it represented. For the first time, someone had seen me, really seen me, and decided I was worth something. I drove home in my new car, still half convinced I was dreaming. When I pulled into the driveway, I parked next to my parents' empty spot, knowing they wouldn't be back for a few more days. It felt weird, almost like I was stepping into a version of my life that didn't belong to me. Over the next couple of days, I couldn't stop staring at the car. It was like this constant reminder that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as invisible as I thought. I started to feel a tiny spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. But of course, it didn't take long for reality to come crashing back. The morning my parents and Mia came back from Hawaii, I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book. I'd parked the car in the driveway on purpose, wanting to see how they'd react. When they pulled in, I watched through the window as Mom spotted it first. She fours, her hand halfway to the car door. Dad noticed it a second later, and then Mia. They all stood there, staring at the car like it had just landed from another planet. What the hell is this? Mom said, her voice carrying through the open window. I waited a beat before getting up and heading outside. Oh, hey, I said casually. You're back. Mom pointed at the car, her face red. Whose is that? Mine, I said, twirling the keys around my finger. Mia let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Yeah, right. Like you could afford that. Uncle Jack gave it to me, I said, enjoying the way their faces changed as the words sunk in. Jack? Mom said, her voice sharp. You went to Jack? Why not? I shot back. It's not like I had anyone else to turn to. For a second, nobody said anything. Then Mom's face twisted. Well, you need to give it to Mia, she said finally. I blinked. What? She needs a car for college, Mom said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And you don't need something that fancy. You're just going to school. Mia's going to— Oh, hell no, I said, cutting her off. Mom's jaw tightened. Excuse me? I said no. Can you hear me? I repeated. This is my car and I'm not giving it to anyone. Mia stepped forward, her hand outstretched. Come on, Nat. Don't be selfish. You know I'll look better driving it anyway. I laughed, shaking my head. Unbelievable. You guys just got back from a week in Hawaii that I wasn't invited to, and now you want my car? Not happening. Dad's face turned red. If you don't hand over those keys, you can find somewhere else to live. Funny you should say that, I said, walking to the car. I opened the trunk, revealing my packed suitcases and boxes. I was planning on leaving anyway. The look on their faces was priceless. Mom's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Mia just stared, her arms crossed, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. I got into the car, started the engine, and rolled down the window. Don't worry, I said. I'll send you pictures. You know, so you can live vicariously through me. Then I drove off, leaving them standing there in the driveway. Driving away from my parents' house felt like ripping off a bandage. It stung, but at the same time, there was this weird sense of relief. For years, I'd been stuck in their shadow, always trying to be enough, and for once, I was leaving it all behind, on my terms. I drove straight to Uncle Jack's place. When I pulled up, he was sitting on the porch. He grinned when he saw me. Figured you'd be back sooner or later, he said, standing up to help me with my bags. I told him everything that had happened, from the car confrontation to Dad's ultimatum. Jack listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When I finished, he shook his head and said, "Sounds like you made the right call." He set me up in his spare room, which wasn't much, but it was cozy. Over the next few days, I started settling into this new version of my life. I still had some savings from a part-time job I'd worked during high school, so I wasn't completely broke, and Jack offered to help out with anything I needed. Meanwhile, I made a point to block my parents and Mia on my phone and social media. I wasn't about to let them drag me back into their drama. But of course, that didn't stop them from trying. A few days later, I was in the kitchen helping Jack with dinner when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, and before I could even say hello, Mom's voice came through the line. "Natalie, where are you?" she demanded. I regret picking up. "I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry about me." "Don't worry, you just left," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how selfish that was? Your father and I have been worried sick." "Worried?" I said with sarcasm. "You didn't seem too worried when you were in Hawaii." "That's not the point," she said quickly. "You can't just run off and expect us to..." "To what?" I interrupted. "To care? Let's not pretend this is about me, Mom. You just don't like that I'm not playing along anymore." She stayed silent for a while, then sighed. "You're being dramatic. Come home, and we can talk about this like adults." "No thanks," I said. "I'm good where I am." Before she could argue, I hung up and blocked the number. After that, things were quiet for a while. I spent my days getting ready for college, organizing my paperwork, buying supplies, and figuring out logistics. Jack was a huge help, driving me around to pick up things I needed and giving me advice about living on my own. But the calm didn't last long. One afternoon, about a week after I'd moved in, Jack and I were sitting on the porch when a car pulled up in front of the house. I thought it was one of his neighbors, but then I saw who got out: Mom and Mia. "Oh, this should be good," Jack muttered, crossing his arms. Mom marched up the walkway like she was on a mission. Mia followed behind her, looking less confident, but still wearing that smug expression she always got when she thought she was about to win. "Natalie," Mom said as she reached the porch, "come over here, we need to talk." Ignoring Jake, I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's nothing to talk about." There's plenty to talk about," she said, her tone sharp. "This behavior is unacceptable. You can't just run off and ignore your family." "I'm not ignoring you," I said. "I'm setting boundaries." "Boundaries?" Mia scoffed. "What are you, a therapist now?" Jack chuckled, clearly enjoying the show. Mom shot him a glare before turning back to me. "Natalie, enough of this nonsense. You need to come home and return that car right now. It's not fair to Mia." There it was, the real reason they were here. "This isn't about me coming home," I said. "You just want the car." "That car was a mistake," Mom said, her voice rising. "Jack had no right to give it to you." Jack finally stood up, stepping between us. "Actually, I had every right," he said calmly. "It's my money, and I'll spend it however I damn well please." Mia rolled her eyes. "It's ridiculous. You don't even need a car like that, Natalie. You're not going anywhere important." I laughed. "You mean like Columbia University?" "That's where I'm going." The color drained from Mia's face. Mom was shocked. "Columbia?" "Yeah," I said, holding her gaze. "I got in. Full acceptance. But I'm guessing you didn't notice since you were too busy planning your trip." For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Mia muttered, "Whatever. State's better anyway." "Sure it is," I said, smirking. My mom didn't back up. "Natalie, I'm serious. If you don't come home and return that car, you're going to regret it." "No, I won't," I said firmly. "I'm done. Done with the guilt trips, done being the invisible one, done with all of it. You've made it clear where I stand, and I'm not playing along anymore." Jack put a hand on my shoulder. "I think it's time for you two to leave," he said, his voice calm but firm. Mom opened her mouth to argue, but Jack cut her off. "Now." Mia looked like she wanted to say something, but Mom grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the car. As they drove away, I felt this weird mix of emotions, but mostly I felt free. Jake looked at me and said, "There's a reason your mom acts the way she does, but some things are better left in the past." I didn't comment on that. I knew he would tell me in the right time. And yeah, this is how things turned out. Do you think I overreacted to their trip? I guess I had the right to stand for myself after all these years. But also, I'm damn sure my mom won't let this slide, especially with Jake in the picture. I'll keep you guys updated ID something pops up. Stay tuned. Final update. Hey folks, it's me again. Thanks for all your comments and support. It really meant a lot while I was sorting through everything with my family. I wanted to share one last update because just like I anticipated, my mom didn't stay silent. So, here it goes. After Mom and Mia stormed out of Jack's house that day, something shifted. It was like I could finally breathe. I wasn't bracing for their next argument or trying to prove anything to them anymore. They didn't get what they wanted, and I was done trying to please them. The next few weeks flew by as I got ready to move to Colombia. Jack was amazing, helping me navigate everything. Between buying supplies, sorting through old stuff, and figuring out how to fit my life into a few boxes, it was chaos, but in the best way. One day, Jack announced we were going to a furniture store. "You need a good desk," he said, dragging me along. "I don't need anything fancy," I protested. "Nonsense. You're going to an Ivy League school. You need a desk that says, 'I'm smarter than you.'" I couldn't stop laughing. Jack has this way of turning even the simplest things into an adventure. We spent an hour debating desk styles until I gave in and chose one he liked. "See?" he said with a grin. "You've got taste after all." With every little step, setting up my new laptop, choosing bedding, planning my schedule, it felt like I was leaving the past behind for good. I stayed distant from my parents and Mia. They didn't call and I didn't miss the drama. Jack, on the other hand, couldn't resist poking the bear. "You know," he said one night over dinner, "your mom called me." I froze. "What did she want?" She was fishing for details. How much I spent on the car, what your plans were, all that nonsense. And I told her to mind her own business and hung up. I couldn't stop laughing. "You're the best," he said. "You know, Natalie, this is the best thing that's ever happened to you, getting out of that house. You're finally free to figure out who you are without their nonsense holding you down." And he was right. Moving day came faster than I expected. Jack and I packed up the car with everything I owned, which wasn't much. As we pulled out of the driveway, I felt this weird mix of excitement and nerves. Columbia's campus was everything I'd imagined. Massive stone buildings, sprawling greens, and this electric energy. Jack helped me carry my stuff to my dorm, cracking jokes about how fancy it was compared to his old college apartment. For the first few weeks, everything felt like a dream. But of course, my mom and Mia weren't going to let me go that easily. The first sign of trouble came one afternoon when I was heading back to my dorm. I noticed Mia had tagged me in a post on social media. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a picture of my old room back home, completely empty, with the caption, "Out with the old, in with the new." Some people can't handle the truth. Actually, the post stung more than I wanted to admit. Mia wasn't just trying to get under my skin. She was painting me as the villain to anyone who'd listen. A few of our mutual friends from high school commented things like, "OMG, what happened?" And, "Sounds like Natalie's being dramatic again." It didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I started getting texts from people I hadn't talked to in months, asking why I was causing drama with my family. Mia had clearly been spreading her version of the story, and I was the bad guy in all of it. Then, just as I was starting to move past it, Mom showed up. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was in the library working on an assignment when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Come outside. We need to talk." I didn't need to guess who it was. Sure enough, when I stepped outside, there she was. Linda, in all her overbearing glory, standing by her car with a look that could curdle milk. "Mom," I said, crossing my arms, "what are you doing here?" "Don't use that tone with me," she snapped. "We need to talk about this ridiculous stunt you've pulled." "What stunt?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Running away from home, turning your back on your family, dragging Jack into your nonsense." "Jack didn't drag me into anything." I cut her off. "He actually supports me, which is more than I can say for you." She took a step closer, lowering her voice like she didn't want anyone to overhear. "Natalie, this has gone on long enough. You need to come home and fix this. People are talking." "Good," I said, shrugging. "Let them talk. Maybe they'll finally see what's really going on." Her face twisted in anger. But before she could say anything else, I added, "By the way, Mia's little smear campaign? It's not working. I don't care what she tells people, and neither should you." Mom's eyes narrowed. "You've changed, Natalie, and not for the better." "No, Mom," I said, standing my ground. "I've just stopped pretending to be okay with your games." She stood there for a moment, clearly searching for something to say. But when nothing came, she got in her car and drove off without another word. After 2 days, Jack called me with some unexpected news. "Your mom showed up at my house," he said, clearly amused. "Why?" "She wanted to talk about the will," he said, laughing. "I think she's worried I'm leaving everything to you." Typical Linda, always thinking about what's in it for her. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her not to worry about it. But honestly, Natalie, her showing up here isn't about the money. It's about control. She's afraid of what I might tell you. Your mom has spent her whole life hiding things, and she knows I don't play by her rules." My stomach churned. "Hiding what?" Jack hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Let's not open that can of worms right now. Focus on school, Natalie. You've got bigger things to worry about." His words hung in the air. I didn't push him, but I couldn't stop wondering what he wasn't telling me. Anyways, I am settling into my new life. My classes are amazing, my dorm feels like home, and for the first time, I'm not living in Mia's shadow or trying to earn my parents' approval. It's just me, myself, and I. And for the first time, this is enough. Thank you all for reading and sharing your thoughts. It means a lot. Your advice has been super helpful. If you've been in a similar situation, stand your ground and speak up for what you deserve. And hey, if you can't handle it all on your own, trust me, karma has a way of taking care of things. This story is titled, Family Who Abandoned Me Invited Me to My Sister's Wedding, but my father kicked me out saying I was embarrassment to the family, so I did this and their whole day flipped down. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. So, after 7 years of radio silence, I got a wedding invite from my younger sister Claire. Yeah, that Claire. The golden child, the apple of my dad and stepmom's eye, the one I hadn't spoken to since cutting off the whole toxic mess that is my family. I mean, the sheer audacity, right? 7 years of nothing. No calls, no texts, no, hey, how's life? And suddenly, I'm invited to this big, fancy wedding? It wasn't just the invite, though. There was a handwritten note tucked in there. Claire's handwriting. Unmistakable. She wrote that she missed me and wanted to fix things. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if this was some kind of prank. Like, was she serious? After everything that happened? After how they treated me? Now she wanted me back in the fold? For context, let me rewind a bit. Our mom passed away when I was 15, and Claire was 12. It wrecked us, as you can imagine. But while I was still trying to process my grief, my dad was out there moving on. A year later, he remarried. Enter Denise, the stepmom from hell. From day one, she had this unspoken mission to erase every trace of my mom. Family photos? Gone. My mom's favorite decor? Packed up and thrown out. I was devastated. But Claire? She clung to Denise like she was some kind of savior. I couldn't blame her. She was just a kid, and she needed someone. But me? I couldn't stand Denise or the way she controlled everything. Things got worse as we got older. By the time I went to college, Dad refused to help me financially. His reasoning? I needed to man up and learn responsibility. Meanwhile, he was showering Claire with everything. College tuition, a brand new apartment, even a car. All paid for without a second thought. I was juggling part-time jobs, barely scraping by, and trying to build an event planning business from scratch. Denise, of course, dismissed it as playing around, while Claire was the star of the family, excelling in school and apparently deserving of all their support. Eventually, I had enough. After years of feeling like I was the outsider in my own family, I cut ties. No dramatic confrontation, no big fallout, just silence. I stopped calling, stopped visiting, and focused on building my life. I threw myself into my work, and honestly, I thrived. My business grew beyond anything I ever imagined, and I was finally in a place where I didn't need anyone. Not Dad, not Denise, not Claire. Which brings us back to the wedding invite. At first, I wanted to toss it in the trash. Why should I care? They didn't care about me when I was struggling to get through school, when I was scraping together enough money to buy groceries, when I needed a family. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the note from Claire. I couldn't tell if she was genuine or if this was just another one of Denise's manipulations. Either way, I decided to go. If nothing else, I figured I could show up, see how things played out, and leave if it got too unbearable. Here's the thing. I wasn't planning to go empty-handed. Despite the years of animosity, I still wanted to do something nice for Claire. I offered to help plan her wedding. You know, give her the full service from my company at a massive discount. She politely declined, saying Denise had already taken care of everything. That stung a little, not gonna lie. But hey, I'd done my part. I'd extended the olive branch. The ball was in their court. So there I was, prepping myself for the big day. I knew walking into that venue would stir up a lot of old wounds, but I convinced myself it was worth it. Maybe Claire was sincere. Maybe this was her way of reaching out, of trying to make amends. I didn't have high expectations, but I held onto a sliver of hope. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Memories of the past kept flooding back. Holidays where I sat on the sidelines while Claire got all the attention. Conversations where Denise belittled me in front of Dad. Moments when I realized I wasn't part of the family anymore. I told myself it didn't matter. I was going to the wedding for Claire, not them. And if things went south, I could always leave. I had nothing to prove to anyone. The next morning, I put on my best suit, got in my car, and drove to the venue. I arrived early because, well, that's just how I am. I'm a planner, always have been. The place was breathtaking. High ceilings, lush flowers, the works. They'd clearly spared no expense. As I walked through the doors, I felt a mix of nerves and unease. This was my first time seeing my family in almost a decade. Would they welcome me? Ignore me? Tear me apart? I had no idea. When I spotted Claire, she looked radiant. She came up to me, gave me a warm hug, and thanked me for coming. For a moment, I thought, okay, maybe this won't be so bad. But then I saw Denise. She was standing off to the side, watching me like a hawk. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and I could tell she wasn't happy I was there. Welcome, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Still running that little party business of yours? I gritted my teeth and smiled back. It's going well, thanks. She smirked, clearly unimpressed, and turned her attention to someone else. Classic Denise. I shook it off and found my seat. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give them that. Claire looked genuinely happy, and for a while I forgot about all the tension. But deep down, I knew the peace wouldn't last. This was my family, after all. Drama was inevitable. Walking into the reception hall, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't the venue, because let's be real, the place was stunning. The chandeliers sparkled like something out of a magazine. The tables were set with silverware so polished I could see my reflection, and the floral arrangements looked like they'd been imported straight from heaven. No, the knot wasn't from the decor. It was from the inevitable. This was the first time I'd faced my family in nearly 7 years, and I knew what was coming. I made my way to the seating chart, scanning the list to find my name. The knot in my stomach turned into a sinking feeling when I found it. Table 14. I didn't need a map to know where that was. Weddings are practically a blueprint. Immediate family at the prime tables, then close friends, then extended family, and finally, the random stragglers. Table 14 was firmly in the "we don't care if you're here" zone. When I got there, I realized the insult wasn't subtle. My table mates were distant relatives I barely remembered. Aunt Lydia, who constantly mispronounced my name and reeked of mothballs, and Uncle Roger, who spent every family gathering droning on about his coin collection. The other 2 people at the table? I didn't even know who they were. Meanwhile, I spotted Claire's friends and Denise's family, all cozied up near the dance floor. Dad and Denise were front and center, naturally, basking in their self-appointed VIP status. I couldn't help but laugh to myself. This was so on-brand for them. 7 years of no contact, and they still managed to make it clear I was an afterthought. Fine. I didn't come here for the seating arrangement. I came for Claire, or so I told myself. I tried to keep my cool. I poured myself a glass of water, glanced around the room, and pretended I wasn't bothered. But then, the first landmine of the evening walked straight up to my table. Dad. And he was clearly drunk. Now I knew this wasn't going to be a pleasant interaction. Dad doesn't do pleasant when he drinks. He does loud, rude, and completely inappropriate. True to form, he slammed his hand on the table, making Aunt Lydia jump. "What the hell are you doing here, Matt?" he slurred. "You weren't supposed to come." I stared at him, stunned. "I got an invitation," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I even pulled it out of my pocket as proof. "Claire invited me." He snorted. "You should have stayed where you belong. You're just here to embarrass us, aren't you? Showing up with your little party business like it means something." His voice was getting louder, and I could feel eyes turning toward us. My face burned with a mix of anger and humiliation, but I kept quiet. Before I could respond, Denise appeared at his side, perfectly timed as always. "Matt," she said, her tone dripping with mock concern, "do you even make enough to buy that suit, or is it rented?" She gave me this smug little smirk, as if she delivered the punchline of the century. I looked at her, then back at Dad, and realized there was no point. You can't reason with people like them, especially not when they're drunk on booze and their own sense of superiority. So, I did the only thing I could do. I stood up, smoothed my suit, and said, "Excuse me." I walked away without another word. I didn't head straight for the door, though. I wanted to take a moment to clear my head, so I wandered outside to the patio. The night air was cool, and for a moment, it felt like I could breathe again. But the voices from inside kept ringing in my ears. Embarrassment, little party business. God, they couldn't even let me exist without tearing me down. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the garden, trying to decide what to do next. Leave and never look back? Go back inside and pretend none of it bothered me? Neither option felt right. I was lost in thought when I heard the music start up inside. Cheerful, upbeat, completely at odds with how I felt. That's when I realized I couldn't stay. I didn't owe these people anything, least of all my time or energy. I made my way back inside, sticking to the edges of the room to avoid being noticed. On my way out, I glanced over at the event staff. They were setting up for the next course, arranging plates with an efficiency I couldn't help but admire. Something about them felt familiar. I slowed down, watching them move, and that's when it hit me. I knew these people. These weren't just random staff members. They were my employees. My mind raced. My company had recently acquired a smaller event planning business, and it turned out this wedding was one of their gigs. No wonder the setup looked so polished. It was my team doing the work. I felt a strange mix of emotions, pride, surprise, and most of all, a growing sense of irony. Claire and Denise had hired my company without even realizing it. Or maybe they did realize it and just didn't care. Either way, the power dynamics of the evening had just shifted dramatically, and for the first time all night, I felt like I had the upper hand. I stepped to the side and pulled out my phone, dialing my operations manager. When she answered, I kept my voice low. "Hey, quick question," I said. "This wedding, are we running it?" There was a pause then. "Yeah, why?" I couldn't help but laugh. "No reason," I said. "Just wanted to confirm." I hung up and stared back at the room. As I stood there, still processing the fact that my team was running the wedding I had just been humiliated at, a realization hit me like a freight train. Everything, the flowers, the lighting, the perfectly timed dinner service, was being executed by my company. Claire and Denise had unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, hired me to bring their dream wedding to life. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or scream. Part of me wanted to storm back inside and announce, "Hey, guess what? All this, it's mine." But the more calculating part of me knew there was a better way to handle this. After all, Dad and Denise had gone out of their way to insult me, treating me like I didn't belong. If they didn't want me there, they sure as hell didn't deserve the work of my team. I dialed my operations manager again, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "Hey, Kate," I said, trying to sound calm. "Can you confirm the client's contract for tonight?" "Sure, Matt," she said, clearly puzzled. "Why?" "I'll explain later. Just tell me, does the contract include the usual termination clause?" Kate didn't even have to look it up. "Yep. Hostile or discriminatory behavior towards staff or management gives us the right to terminate services immediately." "Bingo." "Perfect," I said, a smile creeping onto my face. "We're invoking it. Start packing up." There was a pause on her end, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. "Wait, what happened?" she asked. "Is everything okay?" "Let's just say the client has made it clear they don't want me or us here," I replied. "I'll fill you in later. Just trust me on this one." Kate didn't hesitate. "Got it. I'll handle it." I hung up, my heart pounding. This was it. If Dad and Denise thought they could treat me like trash and still enjoy the fruits of my labor, they were in for a rude awakening. I wasn't doing this out of spite. Okay, maybe a little, but mostly because it felt like the right thing to do. I wasn't about to let them disrespect me while benefiting from my hard work. It wasn't personal. It was business. Back inside, the reception was in full swing. The music was playing, guests were mingling, and servers were bringing out the first course. Everything seemed perfect on the surface, but I knew the chaos was about to unfold. My team moved like a well-oiled machine, discreetly packing up equipment and supplies while keeping up appearances. Guests didn't notice anything at first, which was a testament to their professionalism. I stayed outside, watching from the patio as the plan unfolded. My team began taking down floral arrangements, rolling up table linens, and quietly clearing out decorations. It was like watching a magician make an entire room disappear without anyone realizing it. Denise might have been able to belittle me, but she couldn't touch the quality of my work, or my employees. The first sign of trouble came when the lighting crew started dismantling the uplights around the room. A few guests noticed, pointing and whispering to each other, but no one said anything yet. Denise, of course, was too busy holding court at her table to realize what was happening. Dad was nowhere to be seen, probably off nursing another drink. As more and more decorations disappeared, the whispers grew louder. Finally, one of the servers walked over to Denise and said something to her. Her face went from smug to furious in a matter of seconds. She shot up from her chair and marched across the room, heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floor. I could hear her from the patio. "What's going on? Why are they taking everything down?" The server looked genuinely terrified. "I don't know, ma'am. You'll have to ask the event manager." That's when she spotted Kate, who was calmly directing the staff. Denise stormed over, her voice escalating with every step. "What is this? What the hell are you doing?" Kate didn't flinch. "We're following the terms of the contract, ma'am. Services are being terminated due to hostile behavior toward our management." Denise blinked, stunned. "What hostile behavior? Who even is your management?" Kate gestured toward the patio where I was standing. Denise turned, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. I gave her a small wave, my expression as neutral as possible. She stormed outside, her face red with rage. "You!" she hissed. "You can't do this. This is Claire's wedding, and this is my company," I replied, my voice calm. You made it clear earlier that you don't respect me or what I do. So why would you want my services? Her jaw dropped. You're doing this to punish me? To ruin Claire's wedding? I shook my head. This isn't about Claire. It's about the way you and Dad treated me. You can't humiliate me and then expect me to provide top-tier service. That's not how this works, Denise sputtered, trying to come up with a response. Before she could, Kate walked over and handed me a clipboard. We're ready to roll out, she said. Everything's packed. I nodded. Thanks, Kate. Great work as always. Denise looked like she was about to explode, but I didn't stick around to find out. I handed her my lawyer's card and said, if you have any questions about the contract, feel free to reach out to our legal team. Have a great evening. And with that, I walked away, leaving her standing there speechless. The aftermath was even more chaotic than I anticipated. By the time my team rolled out, the reception hall was practically bare. The chandeliers still hung from the ceiling, but that was about it. No flowers, no table settings, no uplights. Guests were standing around, confused and whispering. Claire looked like she was on the verge of tears, and for a split second, I felt guilty. But then I reminded myself, this wasn't about her. This was about standing up for myself. The drive home from Claire's wedding should have been satisfying. I mean, I just orchestrated one of the most legendary mic drops of my life. But as the taillights of my team's trucks disappeared in my rearview mirror, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. This wasn't how I imagined the day going. Still, I knew I'd made the right call. For the first time in a long time, I stood up for myself, not just as a business owner, but as a person. And while the night didn't go the way I'd hoped, I wasn't going to let that stop me from moving forward. This was just the beginning. I didn't have much time to dwell on it, though, because the fallout began almost immediately. The first inkling of chaos hit my phone about 20 minutes into my drive. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, all flooding in. Denise, predictably, led the charge with a string of angry texts. They were long and rambling, filled with accusations that I'd ruined everything and destroyed Claire's big day out of spite, each one more dramatic than the last. Denise wasn't just angry, she was furious. The kind of furious where every sentence ends in an exclamation point and the entitlement practically drips off the screen. I can't believe you did this to Claire, she started. You're a selfish, vindictive little boy who can't handle someone else being happy. You ruined this family's reputation. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Oh, but she wasn't done. The messages went on, each one more unhinged than the last. She accused me of sabotaging the wedding out of jealousy, called me pathetic, and even demanded that I refund the entire cost of the event. Yes, refund. She genuinely believed I should pay her back for the services my company had already provided, as if she had some moral high ground to stand on. You've embarrassed this entire family, she continued. Do you know what people are saying about us now? I should have known better than to trust you with anything important. You are a failure, Matt, and you always will be. The audacity was almost laughable. I didn't respond and just muted her number. She wasn't worth my energy. Dad wasn't far behind. His voicemails were less coherent, but just as nasty. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say the phrases selfish brat and I'll sue your AT featured prominently. He even threatened to call the cops at one point, which honestly made me laugh. Call the cops for what? Breaching a contract he didn't even know existed. Good luck with that. The most surprising message, though, came from Claire. I'd expected anger from her too, but when I finally read her text, it wasn't what I anticipated. Why would you do this to me? She wrote. I thought you came to support me. I didn't think you'd ruin my wedding. Oof, that one hit harder than I expected. It wasn't like Denise's venom or Dad's drunken tirades. This felt like genuine hurt. Claire and I hadn't been close in years, but I could still hear the pain in her words. I could tell she genuinely didn't understand why I'd made the decision I did. And honestly, I didn't blame her. Claire had always been caught in the middle of this mess. Denise had her claws in her from a young age, and Dad wasn't exactly the kind of parent who encouraged independent thought. Claire had grown up in the same toxic environment I'd escaped from, but instead of fighting it, she'd adapted to it. I wanted to respond to her, to explain my side, but I wasn't sure it would make a difference. For a second, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But then I remembered why I'd made the call in the first place. The next morning, the situation escalated. Denise, true to form, couldn't let it go. She started calling people, family members, friends, anyone who would listen, and spinning the story in her favor. By noon, I'd already received texts from 2 aunts and a cousin, all asking me to explain what really happened. To save myself from repeating the same thing over and over, I sent out a blanket text to the handful of relatives I still semi-trusted. Long story short, I was insulted, disrespected, and treated like an outsider, so I terminated my company's services per the terms of the contract. If you have questions, Ask Denise. If you want the truth, ask the venue staff. I'm done defending myself. One of my aunts responded almost immediately. Good for you, she wrote. We saw how Denise treated you at Thanksgiving 5 years ago. She's always been awful to you. I'm just sorry Claire got caught in the middle. Her support caught me off guard. I'd spent so many years assuming the entire family had written me off that I hadn't even considered the possibility that some of them might be on my side. It was a small comfort in the middle of a storm. Then came the unexpected fallout from the guests. By the afternoon, I started getting emails and inquiries, business inquiries. Apparently, word had spread among some of the wedding attendees about what had happened, and a few of them were impressed with how my team had handled the situation. One woman, who I vaguely remembered as a family friend of Claire's in-laws, reached out to say she admired the professionalism of my staff. I heard what happened, she wrote, and I just wanted to say your team handled everything with incredible grace. It was clear the issue wasn't with your company, but with the family. I'm hosting a charity gala in a few months, and would love to work with you if you're available. Talk about a silver lining. I responded immediately, thanking her for her kind words, and setting up a time to discuss the event. Within a few hours, I'd received 3 more similar emails from other guests. It was surreal. The same wedding I'd been accused of ruining was now turning into free publicity for my business. Denise's attempts to humiliate me had backfired spectacularly. Of course, Denise wasn't done. By evening, she'd escalated her campaign against me to the digital realm. I discovered she'd left a scathing review about my company online, accusing us of being unprofessional and unreliable. The review was filled with outright lies, claiming we'd arrived late, provided poor service, and abandoned the event without warning. Thankfully, I was prepared for this. I contacted my lawyer immediately, and within hours, we'd sent Denise a cease and desist letter, warning her that any further false statements would be treated as defamation. The review was removed the next day, and as far as I know, she hasn't tried to post anything else since. Denise had apparently decided to escalate her entitled tantrum to new heights. The next morning, while I was reviewing my emails, I got a call from my lawyer. "You're going to love this one," she started, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Claire's family is threatening to sue you for breach of contract." I actually laughed out loud. "You're kidding," I said. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming you abandoned the event and caused irreparable damage to Claire's wedding," my lawyer replied. "They're demanding a full refund and additional damages for emotional distress." The absurdity of it almost made me spit out my coffee. Emotional distress? Because I enforced a clause they agreed to? That's rich. My lawyer chuckled. "Don't worry, Matt. This is nothing more than a scare tactic." Their lawyer, if you can even call him that, sent a laughably vague letter with no specifics. I'll draft a response, but they don't have a leg to stand on. A few days later, Denise's attempt at a lawsuit reached its next ridiculous stage. Their lawyer, who I later learned was one of Dad's poker buddies, sent another letter claiming my decision to terminate services had caused public humiliation and significant financial loss. He even threw in some inflated numbers for the supposed value of the event decorations and catering services. The best part? The letter also accused me of being malicious and vindictive for taking down the decor during the event. The plaintiff's family was subjected to public embarrassment, it read. The abrupt removal of event services tarnished the reputation of the hosts and caused irreparable harm to their social standing. I couldn't stop laughing as I read it. Denise was genuinely trying to paint herself as the victim in a scenario she'd entirely created. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My lawyer, however, was far less amused. "They're trying to throw mud at the wall and see what sticks," she said during our next call. "Their entire case hinges on the idea that you violated the contract, but the clause you invoked is ironclad. We'll respond formally, and I'll make it clear that pursuing this further will only waste their time and money." The legal back and forth dragged on for about 2 weeks. Denise and Dad kept pushing, likely because their lawyer didn't have the guts to tell them they had no chance of winning. Meanwhile, my lawyer was working behind the scenes to compile all the evidence we needed to shut this down for good. We had everything. The original contract, signed by Claire, which clearly outlined the termination clause. Witness statements from my staff, who had been present when Denise's hostile comments were made. And the pièce de résistance, security footage from the venue. The cameras had captured everything, including Dad's drunken tirade and Denise berating my team. When the footage was brought to their lawyer's attention, the case crumbled almost instantly. My lawyer sent a final letter, laying out the evidence in excruciating detail, and warning them that if they continued to pursue the matter, we'd countersue for defamation and legal fees. 2 days later, I got an email from my lawyer. They've dropped the case. No further action required. The most surprising fallout, though, came from Claire's new husband, Adam. He called me a few days after the wedding. I almost didn't answer, but eventually, out of curiosity, I answered. Hey, Matt, he said, his tone awkward. I know Claire wants to talk to you, he continued. She feels terrible about everything. She's just, I don't know, scared? She's stuck between you and Denise, and it's tearing her up. I sighed. I get it, but if she wants to talk, it has to come from her. I'm not going to chase her down. I'll tell her, he promised. I hung up feeling strangely hopeful. Maybe Claire and I still had a chance to mend things. Maybe not. Either way, I'd finally stood up for myself, and that was a win in my book. A few weeks after the chaos settled, I got a text from Claire. Hey, can we meet up? I feel like we need to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment, unsure of how to feel. On one hand, it was Claire reaching out. The same Claire who had stayed silent while Denise and Dad humiliated me at her wedding. The same Claire who had watched my company, the company I built from nothing, get insulted and then didn't say a word as I walked out. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the nagging doubt. What did she want from me now? Was this an actual olive branch, or was she just here to smooth things over for her own sake? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Sure, let me know when and where, I replied. We met at a small cafe, one I used to go to back when I was starting my business. It was neutral ground, but I couldn't help but feel a tension in the air as I walked in. Claire was already there, sipping a coffee. She looked up and smiled, an awkward, forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Hey, she said, gesturing for me to sit. Hey, I replied, taking the seat across from her. There was a long pause before she spoke. I'm really sorry about everything that happened at the wedding, she began. It got so out of hand, and I know Denise and Dad said some things they shouldn't have. I raised an eyebrow. Some things? She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Okay, a lot of things, but you have to understand. They were stressed. Weddings are a lot of pressure, and emotions were high. It wasn't personal. I let out a bitter laugh. Not personal? Claire. They called me an embarrassment. They mocked my business, belittled me, and basically told me I shouldn't have been there. How is that not personal? She sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Look, I'm not saying what they did was right, but you pulling out the way you did wasn't fair either. You ruined the reception, Matt. People are still talking about it. There it was, the real reason she wanted to talk. So this isn't about what they said or did, I said, my tone icy. This is about how it made you look. That's not what I'm saying, she replied quickly, though the defensive edge in her voice told a different story. I just think you could have handled it differently. You didn't have to punish everyone because of what Denise and Dad said. I stared at her, trying to decide if she actually believed what she was saying or if she was just parroting Denise's narrative. Punish everyone? I echoed. Claire, they hired my company. They insulted me, the owner, in front of everyone. They didn't even bother hiding their disdain. You expect me to just stand there and take it? I expected you to think about someone other than yourself, she shot back. This wasn't about you. It was my wedding. Do you know how humiliating it was when everything fell apart? People were asking me what happened, and I didn't know what to say. I had to deal with the fallout while you just walked away. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. So that's what this is about. Not what they did, not how they treated me. It's about how it inconvenienced you. That's not fair, she said, her voice rising slightly. I'm trying to fix this, but you're making it impossible. Fix it, I repeated. Claire, you haven't once acknowledged what I went through. You're sitting here blaming me for standing up for myself because it didn't fit into your perfect little wedding narrative. Do you even hear yourself? She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. Maybe I wouldn't have to say this if you hadn't made everything about you. I invited you to the wedding because I wanted you there. I was trying to include you, but you turned it into a disaster. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. But it wasn't sadness. It was clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Claire wasn't stuck between Denise and Dad. She was just like them. Entitled, manipulative, and incapable of taking responsibility for her actions. I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table to cover my coffee. You know what, Claire? I'm done. With you, with Dad, with Denise, all of it. I've spent my whole life being the scapegoat for this family, and I'm not doing it anymore. Her eyes widened. Matt, wait. No, I said firmly. You don't get to rewrite this. I came to your wedding because I thought maybe things had changed, but all I got was the same disrespect I've dealt with my whole life. And now you're sitting here blaming me for having the audacity to walk away from it. I'm done, Claire. For good. She sat there, stunned, as I walked out of the cafe. That was the last time I spoke to Claire. She sent a few texts in the days that followed, but I didn't bother responding. There was nothing left to say. She'd shown me who she really was, and I believed her. As for Denise and Dad, I cut them out of my life completely, and it was the best decision I'd ever made. In the months that followed, my company thrived, thanks in part to the wave of new clients who'd been impressed by how professionally my team handled the wedding fiasco. Denise and Dad might have tried to tear me down, but all they did was make me stronger. And Claire? She became just another part of my past. I stopped wondering if she'd ever see things differently because it didn't matter. Family isn't about blood, it's about respect. And none of them had shown me any. And honestly, I don't regret a thing.
My name is Madison, and I came into this world as an afterthought, born to parents who were already in their 40s and had a 10-year-old daughter they considered more than enough. We didn't plan for you, my mother would often say, not maliciously, but matter-of-factly, as if stating the weather. If it wasn't for your grandparents' insistence. She'd trail off, leaving the rest unsaid, but the message was clear. I was here because my maternal grandparents had convinced my reluctant parents to have another child. They were overjoyed at the prospect of a second granddaughter, while my parents viewed me as an obligation they hadn't asked for. My sister, Sarah, was already deep into her own world of teenage concerns when I arrived. She wasn't cruel or mean, she simply acted as if I didn't exist. While I played with my dolls in the corner of our shared living room, she'd be sprawled on the couch, talking on the phone about boys and college applications, completely oblivious to my presence. "Sarah, honey, don't forget your SAT prep books," Mom would say, carefully arranging them in her backpack. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for someone to notice I needed help with my homework. But help rarely came from my parents. Instead, they developed a routine that shaped my entire childhood. Every morning, they'd drop me off at my grandparents' house. "You wanted her," my father would say to my grandfather, keys jingling in his hand as he prepared to leave for work. "She's all yours." My grandparents' house became my real home. They picked me up from school, helped me with my homework, took me to the park, and made sure I was fed and cared for. Only late at night would my parents come to collect me, usually looking tired and slightly annoyed at having to make the trip. "Madison," my grandmother would say, hugging me goodbye each night, "you're the best thing that ever happened to us." And in those moments, wrapped in her warm embrace, I could almost forget that I wasn't wanted elsewhere. This pattern continued day after day, year after year. While my sister prepared for her bright future, I learned to navigate life as an afterthought in my own home. But my grandparents' love was constant, unwavering, and it was in their home that I learned what it meant to be truly valued. One day, my grandfather would tell me as we worked on my math homework, "You'll understand that sometimes the best things in life aren't planned." He'd wink at me, and for a moment, the weight of being unwanted would lift from my small shoulders. With Sarah away at college, I thought things might change at home. Maybe my parents would finally see me, the daughter who remained. I couldn't have been more wrong. "Madison," my mother's voice reached me before I could even drop my backpack after school. "The house needs cleaning. Start with the bathrooms." What had once been Sarah's chores now became mine, along with a host of new responsibilities. The washing machine became my constant companion, and I learned all its quirks and settings by heart. The housework seemed endless. "You live here, you need to contribute," my father would say whenever I showed the slightest hesitation. "Your sister always did her part." By the time I was 14, I had graduated from cleaning to cooking. It wasn't a gradual transition. One day, my mother simply stopped making dinner. "You're old enough now," she announced one morning. "We expect dinner ready when we get home from work." That first night, I made spaghetti. It was slightly overcooked, but edible. My parents ate in silence, then my father looked up from his plate. "Tomorrow, try something with chicken," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. My only escape was dreaming about college. Every night, after finishing the dishes, I'd retreat to my room and browse university websites. I'd imagine myself walking across different campuses, far away from the endless chores and cold silences. Then, when I was 16, Sarah came home with news that changed everything. She bounced through the front door one Sunday afternoon, dragging a tall, well-dressed man behind her. "Mom, Dad," she squealed. "This is James. We're engaged." You'd think someone had just announced they'd won the lottery. My parents literally jumped from their seats, my mother crying tears of joy. My father was already pulling out his phone to call relatives. "We'll pay for everything," my mother declared, hugging Sarah. "Our first daughter's wedding has to be perfect." The wedding preparations consumed our house for months. Every conversation revolved around flowers, venues, and guest lists. Money seemed to flow like water: designer dress, premium vendors, top-tier everything. My grandparents attended the wedding but seemed uncomfortable with the extravagance. I caught my grandmother frowning at the ice sculpture that probably cost more than a semester of college tuition. Grandfather just shook his head at the champagne fountain, but they kept their thoughts to themselves. 2 years later, I sat at our dinner table, 3 college acceptance letters spread before me. After years of playing Cinderella while maintaining straight A's, I'd been accepted to all my top choices. My heart raced as I told my parents the good news. "That's nice," my mother said, not looking up from her plate. "But we can't pay for it. We spent all our savings on your sister's wedding, even took out a loan for it. There's nothing left for college." "But, you paid for Sarah's college," I stammered. "That was different," my mother replied. "We saw potential in her." The silence at the dinner table was deafening after my mother's words about potential. I sat there, acceptance letters suddenly feeling heavy in my hands, as my parents continued eating as if they hadn't just shattered my dreams. "You should get a job," my father said between bites. "Save up some money, take out a student loan. That's what responsible adults do." I left the table without being excused, something I'd never dared to do before. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called my grandmother. Within minutes, I was walking through their familiar front door, tears streaming down my face. "Oh, sweetheart," my grandmother pulled me into a hug while I told them everything between sobs. My grandfather's face grew stern as he listened, but there was a glimmer in his eyes that I couldn't quite read. When I finished, they exchanged a knowing look. "Madison," my grandfather said, taking my hand, "we'd been expecting something like this." "What do you mean?" "We've watched how they've treated you all these years," my grandmother explained, "how they spent money on Sarah's education, her wedding. We knew they might do this to you." My grandfather stood up and walked to his study. When he returned, he was holding a folder. "We've been saving for your education since the day you were born," he said, opening the folder to reveal bank statements. "You can choose any of those 3 colleges. We've got you covered." That night, I went home and packed my things. Not everything, just what I needed. My parents were watching TV downstairs and barely looked up when I told them I was moving in with my grandparents. "Whatever you think is best," my mother said, her eyes never leaving the screen. Was that relief I heard in her voice? The next few weeks were a blur of college preparations. I chose to study financial analysis. Somehow, watching my parents' mismanagement of money had sparked an interest in doing things the right way. My grandparents helped me with every detail, from filling out forms to buying supplies. When I finally started classes that fall, it felt like stepping into a new world. The material was challenging, but I loved every minute of it. Each class felt like a step away from my old life and toward something better. My professors noticed my enthusiasm, and soon I was staying after class to discuss complex financial concepts. For the first time in my life, someone besides my grandparents saw potential in me, real potential. My second year of college was in full swing when my grandmother called with some interesting news about Sarah. "Your sister's having trouble," she said during one of our weekly calls. "Her marketing career isn't taking off like she hoped, and James can't seem to hold down a job. They're constantly asking your parents for money." I wasn't surprised when she told me they were getting it. "Your mother emptied her retirement account last month to help them with rent," my grandmother sighed. "They just can't say no to her." A year later, the situation got worse. Sarah and James couldn't make rent anymore, even with our parents' help. They moved back into my old bedroom, the one I'd spent years keeping spotlessly clean. The irony wasn't lost on me. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My professors had helped me land internships at prestigious financial firms, where I discovered I had a real talent for solving complex financial puzzles. Each challenging project made me more certain I'd chosen the right path. "You've got a natural instinct for this," my supervisor at Morgan Stanley told me during my performance review. We'd love to have you back next summer. I kept my head down and focused on my studies, barely thinking about my family except during calls with my grandparents. But when I visited them during my senior year, I knew something was wrong the moment I walked through their door. My grandmother's usual warm smile seemed forced, and my grandfather, usually quick with a joke, sat quietly in his armchair. The house felt heavy with unspoken words. "What's wrong?" I asked over dinner, watching them push food around their plates. "And don't tell me it's nothing. I know you both too well." They exchanged a look I'd seen too many times before, the one that meant they were trying to protect me from something. Finally, my grandfather spoke. "Your parents came to see us last week," he said, his voice unusually tired. "They wanted their inheritance early." "What do you mean?" I put down my fork. "They're in trouble with the banks," my grandmother explained. "Multiple loans, credit card debt. They said they needed $200,000 to avoid bankruptcy." "And you gave it to them?" I couldn't keep the anger from my voice. My grandfather nodded. "We had to, Madison. They're still our daughter and son-in-law, despite everything. It was most of our savings, but..." "Most of your savings?" I was furious. "After everything they've done? After how they keep enabling Sarah's irresponsible behavior? After how they treated me?" "Sweetheart," my grandmother reached across the table to take my hand. "We know you're angry. But what's done is done. We'll be fine." But I kept getting angry. My parents, who'd never had money for my education, who'd treated me like a servant, had the audacity to demand money from the only people who'd ever truly cared for me. All because they couldn't say no to Sarah and couldn't manage their own finances. My hard work paid off after graduation. With glowing recommendations from my professors and impressive internship experiences, I landed a position at one of the top financial firms in the city. The starting salary was more than I'd ever dreamed of making. I found a modest one-bedroom apartment, nothing fancy but clean and safe. Every morning, I'd wake up grateful that I didn't have to cook breakfast for anyone but myself. My career flourished as I threw myself into each new challenge, earning promotions and bonuses that my younger self couldn't have imagined. Within a few years, I had enough saved for a down payment on my own place. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I couldn't help but think of my parents and Sarah, who'd never managed their money well enough to buy property. Not that they knew about my success, we hadn't spoken in years. Then came the call that changed everything. My grandfather had suffered a massive heart attack. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. My grandmother, who'd been by his side for over 50 years, seemed to lose her spark after that. Less than 2 months later, she followed him. I was arranging my grandmother's funeral when I heard a familiar voice behind me at the funeral home. "Madison? Do you want some help with the arrangements?" I turned to find my mother standing there, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, but something in her expression made me hesitate. "Sure," I heard myself say. "That would be nice." Over the next few days, as we planned the service, my parents began to open up. They were struggling, they admitted. Retirement hadn't been kind to them financially. "We barely make ends meet," my father confessed one afternoon while we were picking out flowers. "And with Sarah's twins." "Twins?" This was news to me. "Yes, 4-year-olds, my mother jumped in. "Such beautiful boys, but they need so much. Sarah and James still can't manage on their own, so we help where we can." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Some things never changed. A week after we laid my grandmother to rest, we gathered in a wood-paneled office for the reading of the will. I sat across from my parents, with Sarah and James slouched in chairs beside them. The room smelled of old papers and furniture polish, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The notary, Mr. Patterson, adjusted his glasses and began reading in a monotone voice. I expected the usual legal jargon, but what came next made everyone sit up straight. To our beloved granddaughter, Madison, he read, "We leave our house at 1542 Maple Street and the sum of $150,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's mouth fell open, and my mother gripped my father's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and continued, "And a personal note from Mr. Henderson to his daughter, Margaret." He looked at my mother. The note reads, "Margaret, remember that we gave you $200,000 when you needed it most. This is our final decision, and we trust you will respect it as we respected your needs then." My mother's face flushed red, then pale. My father stared at the floor, while Sarah and James exchanged worried glances. After the notary finished and gathered his papers, my parents approached me in the parking lot. The confident demeanor they'd shown during the funeral arrangements was gone, replaced by something almost desperate. "Madison, honey," my mother began, her voice trembling, "you have to understand, we always thought we'd inherit the house. We were counting on it. We're struggling," my father added, running his hand through his gray hair. "The mortgage, Sarah's family's expenses, we could really use the house." I looked at them both, remembering all the years of neglect, the constant reminders that I wasn't wanted, the refusal to help with my education. "No," I said firmly. "The house is mine. That's what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." They continued pleading, following me to my car, but I stood firm. Sarah joined in too, talking about how her boys needed a yard to play in, but I simply got in my car and drove away. A week later, my phone rang. It was my mother, asking me to come over for dinner. Something in her voice sounded different, humbled, perhaps. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Pulling up to my childhood home was like stepping back in time, except everything looked shabbier than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the gutters sagged, and the once pristine lawn was patchy and overgrown. Inside, the house was crowded but clean. Sarah's twins, Tommy and Jake, ran circles around the living room while James half-heartedly told them to settle down. The boys were cute, they had Sarah's eyes and James's curly hair. "Madison," my mother smiled, pulling me into an awkward hug. "We made your favorite, pot roast." "That's not my favorite," I said automatically. "That's Sarah's favorite." An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by my father clearing his throat. "Well, why don't you tell us what your favorite food is? We'd love to know." And surprisingly, they seemed genuinely interested. Over dinner, they asked about my job, my apartment, my hobbies. They actually listened when I talked about my work in finance, though I could tell most of it went over their heads. That dinner led to another, then another. Soon, I was joining them for holidays, bringing gifts for the twins, even helping Sarah with their homework sometimes. When they mentioned the house needed repairs, I found myself offering to help. I paid for a new roof, fixed the heating system, repainted the exterior. Each time I wrote a check, my parents would tear up with gratitude. "You're too good to us," my mother would say, hugging me. "We don't deserve this." You're right, I would think, but never say it aloud. Because despite everything, despite all the years of hurt and neglect, some small part of me still wanted to believe people could change. The years passed, and my career continued to flourish. Each promotion brought new opportunities, and my investment portfolio grew substantially. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents seemed to strengthen. They were getting older, both were over 70 now, and I found myself wanting to do something meaningful for them. "I've been thinking," I said during one of our Sunday dinners, watching my father struggle up from his chair. "This house isn't really suitable for you anymore. I want to buy you a new house. Something single-story, with a nice garden, but easier to maintain. Something that would be comfortable for your retirement years." Their reaction surprised me, actual tears of joy. We spent the next few weeks house hunting together, and finally found the perfect place, a beautiful ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood, with wide doorways and no stairs. After closing my checkbook, my parents couldn't stop talking about how excited they were. "We need to have a proper housewarming party," my father declared. "Let us arrange everything. It's the least we can do." That would be lovely, I agreed, planning to present them with the deed during the celebration. Just let me know when. Weeks passed. I was busy with work, but I kept expecting an invitation. When nothing came, I started asking about the date. "Oh, we're still planning," my mother would say. "You know how these things take time." "We want it to be perfect," my father would add. "We'll let you know soon." Something about their vague responses niggled at me. One evening, after another deflecting phone call from my mother, I found myself typing Sarah's name into Facebook. I hadn't looked at her profile in years, we weren't connected on any social media. There it was, posted just hours ago, "So excited for Mom and Dad's housewarming party this Saturday. The new house is gorgeous, can't wait to celebrate with everyone." The post had dozens of comments from relatives and friends, all confirming their attendance. Photos showed decorations being set up, caterers being booked. This wasn't a last-minute gathering, this had been planned for weeks. My hands shaking slightly, I called my mother. "Hi Mom," I kept my voice casual. "Just checking in about the housewarming party. Have you set a date yet?" "Oh honey, not yet," she replied smoothly. "Probably in a couple of weeks. We're still working out the details. We want everyone to be able to come." Everyone except me, apparently. That Saturday, I parked my car a block away from the house I'd bought. Music and laughter drifted through the evening air. Through the large front windows, I could see dozens of people milling about, relatives I recognized, friends of my parents, Sarah's social circle. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was, they were expecting everyone except the person who actually owned the house. I slipped in quietly, following the sound of my father's voice, to the living room. "And after all these years of hard work, we finally did it," he was saying to a group of attentive listeners. "Bought our dream home. Don't forget about Sarah," my mother added proudly. "She helped so much with the down payment. Such a wonderful daughter. Always taking care of her parents," someone commented. "Unlike some people," my mother said pointedly. "You know, our younger daughter hasn't helped us at all. Probably too busy with her career to care about family." I stood in the doorway, heat rising to my face as I watched this performance. Sarah beamed beside them, her 7-year-old twins running between the guests in the house I'd bought. "Actually," I said loudly, making everyone jump, "I think you've got that backwards." The color drained from my parents' faces. Guests turned to stare at me, whispers rippling through the crowd. "Madison," my father recovered first, his smile tight. "What a surprise." "I'm sure it is," I replied, stepping into the room. "Especially since you forgot to invite me to the housewarming party for the house I bought." Dead silence fell over the room. Sarah's husband suddenly became very interested in his shoes. "Well," my mother's voice had an edge to it, "what's done is done. You bought it, yes, but it's ours now. You can't expect eternal gratitude." "That's right," my father added, gaining confidence. "And frankly, you're not welcome here. This is a family gathering. And Sarah and her family will be living here too," my mother announced. "They've already sold their house. It's all arranged." I couldn't help but laugh, a cold, harsh sound that made several guests step back. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a folder. "You seem to be confused about something," I said, opening the folder to reveal the deed and ownership papers. "This house belongs to me. I never signed it over to you. I was planning to give it to you tonight, at what I thought would be a proper housewarming party." My mother's face went from pale to ashen. My father started to sputter. "And now?" I turned to address the stunned guests. "Now, I'd like everyone to leave. This is my house, and the party's over." "You can't do this," my mother's voice rose to a shriek. "We're your parents." "No," I said quietly. "You're just the people who gave birth to me. My real parents, my grandparents, taught me that family means more than blood. They also taught me about finances, which is why I own this house and you don't." They left in tears, my parents, Sarah, James, the twins, and all their guests. I watched from the front porch as they drove away, one by one, until the street was empty. After a few weeks, I learned they'd used the money from selling their own house to buy an apartment. Sarah, James, and the twins moved in with them. They tried calling me for weeks, but I blocked their numbers, their emails, their social media accounts. The house? I sold it a month later and put the money in my account. Someday, I'll have my own children, and I promised myself they'll never have to earn my love or compete for my attention. Unlike my parents, I'll love my children equally and unconditionally, the way my grandparents loved me.